We're covering some more quarterbacks, folks. Last week, if you tuned in, we hit Tom Brady. We talked a little Patrick Mahomes. And now we're going to talk a little Josh Allen and Matthew Stafford just to get the day started. Josh Allen, obviously, coming off a career year in Buffalo, entering his 4th season. And Matthew Stafford, in a new environment and probably one in which he can excel. Nick, I want to start off with Matthew Stafford because I think there's a real good question going into this season. He's entering Sean McVay's offense. He's a legitimate gunslinger, a veteran, and I think his legacy's on the line a little bit here. He's a guy that got put in a bad situation in Detroit, and there's no doubt about that there. But there is a question around, was he a guy that just threw the ball up to Kelvin Johnson when Kelvin Johnson was there? They had some good success. Obviously, since Kelvin's been gone, it hasn't been the same. Detroit's been struggling, and Matthew Stafford's been chased out of town. If he doesn't have a good season, especially with Sean McVay, the Matthew Stafford legacy is kind of tarnished. But personally, I don't see there being a problem there. I think a gunslinger like Matthew Stafford is going to fit into that offense nicely. He's got weapons like Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. And honestly, they've got a pretty solid line, so I think he'll have a pocket to work with, and they'll be able to go for more than his monkey knife fight line. I think the situation's great. And obviously, something to note, too, when you trade a former first overall pick in Jared Goff, another first-round pick, there's going to be some pressure. And I think Matthew Stafford is a guy that shows pressure isn't really the problem. He just needs players to play with. Nick, how do you think Matthew Stafford does this season?
Well, first of all, I'm just glad that we're going to get an opportunity to see how this plays out because there's so little big-time player movement in the NFL, especially relative to what we've seen over the last 5 or so years in the NBA that, oftentimes, it's just this guy, if you're good enough, you're the quarterback for this team for 15 to 20 years. And, you're kind of at the mercy of who the team puts around you. Like, it's not often that, in the middle of your prime as a quarterback, which can be in your early to mid 30s, right, where Matthew Stafford is, that you get a change of scenery and go from one of the bleakest situations, one of the most incompetent organizations in the NFL to one of the brightest and one of the most competent. So, it's kind of like if Damian Lillard leaves the Blazers, or if you want to go all the way back to like Kevin Garnett leaving the Timberwolves, it's really cool to see, a situation that everybody talks about for 10, 12 years. You're like, man, what if this guy had more help? What if he was on a different team? We're going to finally get to see it. So from a fan perspective, I don't really care how the Rams do this year, but it's going to be really, really fun to watch. I'm pretty bullish on Matthew Stafford. I was never a big Jared Goff guy. I think, that system and Sean McVay were able to manufacture some really good seasons out of Jared Goff, 17, 18, 19. He was really productive. I mean, he was a
Pro Bowl quarterback.
He was a legitimate, like, borderline MVP candidate in 2018, partially by virtue of the Rams being a 13-win team. You're just kind of in the conversation naturally. But I think Stafford is a huge step up. When you start to look at this number on Monkey Knife Fight, which I believe is at 4,500.5 passing yards.
He needs 4,500 yards. Yeah, they're teasing
right.
you. It's like what we were talking about with Tom Brady last week with the Patrick Mahomes at the 5,000 mark. They're teasing you to get it. Right. Continue on, but again, I still think he gets it. Nick, continue on there.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry about the 0.5 here. I guess if he throws for exactly 4,500 yards, that's just kind of a loss that you have to take. But it's an interesting number because Stafford hasn't gone over that total since 2013. And of course, you're factoring in the 17th game. But I think Stafford and the Rams are one of those teams that, like we talked about last week, it's not a guarantee that he's playing all 17 of those games. From a durability standpoint, it probably is. He missed some time in 2019, but other than that, he's been a 16-game quarterback. But this should be a really good team, and there's a chance that maybe they don't have a whole lot to play for in Week 17. So I try not to just bankroll that and guarantee that it's a 17-game season for him. With that said, I mean, you start to look at the numbers that Jared Goff was able to put up, a guy who I think almost unanimously at this point, we've decided is just really not that good. I mean, he went over 4,500 in 2 16-game seasons in both 2018 and 2019. And last year was somewhat of a disastrous year, a pretty big step back for Jared Goff, only played in 15 games, but had he played 16, he would have been in the neighborhood of probably 4,200 yards. So even while it felt like it was a really down year for Jared Goff, and it felt like that coaching staff had lost confidence in him midway through the year, he was still going to be within shouting distance of getting to 4,500 yards. So I think when you look at Matthew Stafford, to me, as being a significant upgrade, a guy who the coach really wants, who the coach seems to have clicked with already, This isn't a team that's going to try to air it out 45 times a game. They still want to establish what they can via the running game. But I think this is, I wouldn't say a lock, but for me, I think there's a really, really good chance that Matthew Stafford blows past this number, especially if he does play all 17 games.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with taking the more here. I'm glad that we're agreeing on this one right off the bat here, Nick. And just to play off what you said, right? 2013 was the last time that he passed for 4,500 yards, and he had Kelvin Johnson. He has solid, proven weapons around him again in Los Angeles. He's going to have Cooper Kupp. Sean McVay, having that kind of coach in your back pocket, and Andy Reid as Sean McVay, almost adds an asset on the field of confidence within your play calling in an offense. So it's going to be an awesome mesh experience. I've seen posts from guys like on the defensive line, guys like Leonard Floyd saying, holy moly, I've never seen a guy throw the ball like Matthew Stafford. Now, granted, Leonard Floyd is coming from Chicago, so it's not the best sample size.
Yeah.
But he was there last year with Jared Goff. So it's just something that the team is starting to mesh with starting to mesh with Matthew Stafford. And it's something that is really fun to see. And I think we could see a very explosive step off the page for the Rams offense this year. Something that I think a lot of followers with Sean McVay, something that you said that they were waiting for with Jared Goff, and Jared Goff just couldn't quite get them there. And I think Matthew Stafford being the gunslinger in that background, I think he can totally do it. So, Nick, I'm with you on the more on that one.